Let's hope you don't remember it for just being big and ugly. Folks, I want to thank you for coming out on such a beautiful day. I want to thank you for caring so much about your country that you take the time to come out here and celebrate the freedoms that we do have while we still have them. Now, one thing I'd like to correct from Mike, I'm not a retired Marine. I am a disabled veteran. I retired from NCS as a federal agent in 2008. I retired a little bit early. Was injured, arresting, I'll use plain words, a bad man in 1992, and he ran me over with his car. Did some further damage to my knees and shoulders, and blew a couple discs out my back and screwed up my neck. And managed to stay in the Marine Corps for a little bit while longer, about another 10 years. And I served another 10 years as an NCIS agent before I retired as a civilian. I live 6 miles north of Fulton. Now, if you look on the map, that's the exact epicenter of the middle of nowhere. And I'm not ashamed to tell you that it was by design. I've been all over the world working for you. And I came home to South Dakota because I found out the thing that most people do when they go abroad. It's the best place in the world. The people here are the best people in the world. And there's no other place like it in the world. People try and replicate what we have here. My dad died in 2001. I was still serving in Japan, the NCIS field office there. And Dad he represented South Dakota to me. He was the biggest portion of my life. My dad was a state trooper for 32 and a half years. To show you the kind of background I came up under, Dad was a state trooper, but he also farmed on the side. And as a kid growing up, Dad used to shake his finger at me. He says, "You little bleep bleep and little SOB," he says, "if I ever catch you violating the law," he says, "I'll take you to jail quicker than I will anybody else." And to prove his point, one day, he got me a ticket. And the deputy sheriff that he had write that ticket said, "Well, Doug," he says, "I wouldn't write anybody else's kid a ticket for that." He says, "He's not. That's my boy. He knows better. You write him a ticket." I didn't appreciate that as a young man. I went through a lot of headaches in high school because my dad was a state trooper, and because I was given the name of Stacy growing up. And I was either fighting because my dad was a state trooper, or I was fighting because I had a girl's name. But as I grew, my dad was very patriotic, and I wanted to farm. And Dad came and he said, "Listen, boy, we only have a small family farm. You can't make a living off of that." He says, "You know, you're a smart kid. Your mom and I would like to see you go to Augustana and do what you will with your life. We'll loan you the money." Well, I was raised very patriotically. Dad was an Army veteran, and all my uncles served in the Army. I had 2 great uncles that died during World War II. My great-grandfather was a prisoner of war in Andersonville, fought for the North. So my family lineage goes way back, and we've got a lot of veterans in there. And didn't want to owe Mom and Dad any money for college, so I decided to join the Marine Corps. I want to be as us Marines and soldiers say, I want to be a grunt. That means I want to be in the infantry in the United States Marine Corps. My dad, when I told him I wanted to be a Marine, he wasn't tickled. Matter of fact, he let out a couple cuss words. And he says, "Why do you want to be a jarhead?" And I said, "Well, Dad, this is the toughest branch of service, and the first one's in and the last one's out, and that's the tip of the spear for serving our country." And he says, "Yeah, son," but he says, "You know, they treat them boys real bad. They got terrible living conditions, terrible promotions." He says, "You know, we'd really like you to go to college." The more Dad tried to talk me out of joining the Marine Corps, the more I understood that Dad respected the Marine Corps, regardless of what he said, and that was the path for me. Dad wouldn't sign the paperwork for me to go in as a 17-year-old kid. He says, "I think it's a mistake. Good Lord's gave you some pretty decent brains. I think you'd be better. We'd all be better served if you went to college." Day before I was supposed to go to the MEP station, I turned 18, and Dad came and he says, "Listen," he says, "if I can't talk you out of joining the Marine Corps," he says, "you have to promise me you will not join the infantry." Well, I got to tell you, being a young, romantic 18-year-old kid, I had my heart set on being a Marine grunt. But my dad says, "Boy, you owe me." He says, "Get a job, that you can use that will serve the public after you get out of the Marine Corps. It's Dad, I'm never getting out of the Marine Corps. And Dad, in his infinite wisdom, says, trust me, boy. Trust me, the world doesn't always work out the way you plan it. When I was sitting there, the recruiter said, well, you qualify for anything the Marine Corps has to offer. I says, you know what? I looked at over all those jobs. I says, you know what? My dad's been a cop all these years. He loves serving people. I said, I want to be a cop. I want to be an MP. Never in my life did I ever thought that. Matter of fact, I hated the fact that my dad was a cop. I always worried about him getting hurt. Daddy got hurt quite a few times as a state trooper. But when I had to make that decision, I realized that, you know what? Dad has always loved serving his fellow man, and I respected my father immensely. And that's how I started on the path of serving my fellow man. I spent 13 and a half years in the Marine Corps. I spent another 10 years with NCIS as a civilian agent. I spent 19 years overseas. When Dad died, I got this little farm out in the middle of nowhere because I wanted to be able to relax and be apart, kind of be a hermit. In 2010, folks asked me to run for sheriff up there. I'm happily retired, and I'd seen what happened to my dad for being a cop too long, and I had the sense to say, no, I'll pass on that. I don't need another full-time job. I've got bad knees, bad back, and things ain't getting any better the older I get. And he says, well, why don't you run for the legislature? Folks, I had real good instincts. I said, not only no, but hell no. Last thing I want to do after being a cop all those years was now have to start associating with some more dishonest people. So I said no, and as things will have it, that same young, idealistic young man that re-enlisted in the Marine Corps all those years kept peeking at me in the mirror when I went to shave, and I felt guilty. So I looked, and I looked at who was running, and I looked at their voting record and what they stood for. And at that time, I was finding myself hollering at the TV. Glenn Beck would come on, and he'd tell about how our country's falling apart, and I'd be hollering and just angry that this was happening to our great country, a country that I had bled for, sweat for, and cried for all these years. And my conscience got the better of me. I said, you know what? Broken down old Marines like me don't continue to do our civic duty, and we've got no right to yell at the TV when Glenn Beck tells us how bad the country's getting. So I declared my candidacy. There was a popular incumbent Democrat in the office, and when they heard that I declared my candidacy from the middle of nowhere, they laughed. And they said there's snowball's chance in heck that anybody will ever get elected from that area, ever. Well, it's probably the last thing you want to tell to a determined old broken down Marine is that somebody laughed at him and said he can't do it. Now, I went to all the campaign schools and I listened to what they had to say on how to run for office. And they tell you, don't tell people where you stand on the issues. And don't talk about religion. You know, give them vague statements that, you know, hey, you're a good guy and yada, 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 you should vote for me. And only knock on those good Republican doors well, I never served overseas in all those years as a partisan. I served my fellow South Dakotans, my Americans, without regard to their party affiliation. And I'll be doggone if I was going to ask them to serve them as a representative and become all of a sudden worried about what their party was. So I knocked on a lot of doors. Matter of fact, I knocked on doors. I didn't care whether they were registered or not. I just hit every door and I knocked on the door and I said, I'm sorry for bothering your evening. My name's Stace Nelson. I want to be your next representative. I just want to stop by and pay my respects. And folks would say, well, what party do you belong with? I'd say, well, this is I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. And I'll be the last as long as it supports the first two. And folks were surprised to hear me even say or acknowledge that I was a Christian. And I had a lot of folks, Democrats, independents, libertarians, that said, well, you know, why should I support you? You're a Republican, I'm not. I said, well, you need an honest person to appear to work for you, don't you? They said, well, yeah, I do. So one thing about me, I says, I'm honest. The other thing about me is I promise you that I will do my duties without regard to party affiliation. And I gotta tell you, I've done that, and it's not been easy. Some of you folks may have paid attention to the news, media, and things that happen up here Probably heard that I was thrown out of the Republican caucus, and that I threatened to kill a legislator, and they were going to throw me out of the legislature, and a lot of wild stories. A lot of wild stories. I was uninvited from the caucus when I was meeting with a couple ladies here one day. I'd also raised a ruckus about leadership tampering with bills that were in confidential and in LRC, and I made a stink about it. I've not turned a blind eye just because somebody's got an R behind their name. But at the same time, I've got the most conservative voting record of a Republican in the state of South Dakota. That being said, I also want to tell you that I have a mean libertarian streak in me. And I've done the best to try and balance all of that. But I've done it with the facts of telling the folks what my principles are and how I was going to represent them. Now, a lot of folks say, well, you know, you're just a blind slave to the Republican Party platform. No, I'm not. The Republican Party platform, as it's written here in South Dakota, represents what my principles are and what I believe. And I do support it. Now, there's some small things in there that I don't support. I'd like to pay respect to a couple of my dear friends that are here today. A gentleman I respect dearly, Mr. Corey Heidelberger. Now, he claims to be a pretty harsh liberal, but I found him to be a very intelligent, honest, considerate gentleman that hates crony capitalism and corruption probably as much or more than I do. And in that, there's some things in our Republican Party platform that I disagree with when it comes to supporting crony capitalism, the government being involved in picking winners and losers in our economy and in our business here in South Dakota. Now, folks, the reason why I'm rambling on about this and telling you a little about who I am and how broken down I am and how ugly I am, because I want to tell you, if a broken down, ugly, overweight, old jarhead like myself can make a difference, can wake some folks up, can bridge that gap and let the citizens know that, you know what, not everybody that runs for office is a politician with political aspirations that only cares about their future. And they will tell you everything you want to hear and then vote as they want to, as they can get ahead in Pierre or in D.C. There are still honest people out there that are like our founding fathers. And I ask you to remember, we're talking about the Constitution today, but I want you to harken back to the days when our Declaration of Independence is one of our core legal founding documents in our great country. The people that signed that, when they signed that, they were guaranteed one thing. Not Obamacare for life, not retirement, not a cushy office with secretaries. They were promised when they signed that Declaration of Independence that King George was going to do everything possible to hunt them down and kill them and wipe their families off the face of the earth. Now, the things that I have alike with the Founding Fathers, I signed documents in my lifetime several times that swore to put my life in the line for you, up to and including my very life. I'm not ashamed to tell you, I love my fellow South Dakotans. Those aren't easy words, and it took me a long time as a Christian to understand what the good Lord meant when he says, love thy neighbor as thyself. I'm here to tell you that I have clay feet. I'm as fallible as the next man. But the one thing that I've done right in my life is I put duty to this country, to my community, and to my fellow man that I love first, much to my family's discomfort. My dear daughter Tamina is here today. She's my youngest one. She's the one who was passing out some of the pens. If I never run for office here again, my family will be rooting and cheering. Because they've walked those paths with me, they've walked the parades, they've knocked on doors. But folks, we've got to celebrate the true heroes in America nowadays. It's not some idiot on a football field or a baseball field or a basketball field. It's guys like my buddy Corey Heidelberger, my other buddy on the far right, Bob Ellis, that are willing to get out there and identify the problems of America and write about it and make a ruckus about it. Now, whether you agree with their stance on issues or not, they're willing and brave enough to get out there and put themselves out there. Now, other people that we deserve, that we have to pay homage to, Stephanie Strong. Now, another person you may have heard about, not so much over here in West River, is a good, kind gentleman. He's a disabled Army veteran, my buddy Dan Willard in the back. Folks, when you stand up for what is right and you take a stance, you'll be attacked for it. But don't be afraid of that. I want you to remember that is what our country was founded on, was good, honest, decent people that knew right from wrong and realized, you know what, this isn't right. This is not in the best interest of our country to continue to be enslaved by Britain and King George. Taxation without representation, overtaxation. People that put their lives on the line to say, you know what, enough is enough. We came to America for a better future, not the perpetuation of the wrongs that we experienced in Europe. Folks, I'm here to tell you, I'm ashamed to tell you, that your Constitution is under attack every day that the South Dakota legislature and our U.S. Congress is in session. Our South Dakota legislature violated your Constitution repeatedly by passing omnibus bills that contain pork barrel spending. Our Constitution in South Dakota says that a bill can only have one subject and it must be properly identified in the title. They passed bills that didn't have anything in the body. It said to better education, that they passed out of the committees to pass over the next side of the House so that they could put what they want in there. And when they do that, that deprives you of South Dakotans of the opportunity to go to these hearings and say you either support it or you oppose it. But the bottom line is, folks, this is your state government. It's your federal government. But the problem is, sadly, we don't have enough people that are involved anymore in our country to deter these politicians from hijacking your Constitution, your state government, and your federal government. Folks, I beg of you, if you remember one thing I say today, and one thing you remember today other than the fact that I'm big and I'm ugly, is I beg of you to remember that if we don't start filling these seats and we do not get our neighbors back involved in our government and active in opposing what's happening in our country, folks, we will lose it. We are losing it. It's slipping down. We have $17 trillion in debt that we owe foreign countries. Our very sovereignty as a nation is at stake. And what we hear nowadays, what we hear is we have politicians running to say, well, they're pragmatic politicians. Folks, we're $17 trillion in debt because we've had pragmatic politicians that have been passing spending and more government bills for the last several decades. We don't need more pragmatism in DC. We need a stubborn people like Stephanie Strong, Corey Heidelberger, Bob Ellis, Dan Willard, that will go up there and say, you know what, enough is enough. We don't need more government, because more government means less freedom for you. Because the more government we have is the more taxes they've got to have from you. I want to challenge you. I've ran for election and re-election twice. I'm an old cop. I have a hard time asking for money. Much to my family's chagrin, I financed my campaigns, half of them at least, both times. I spent probably $12,000, $14,000 in the last 3 years running for office. I spent countless hours. My children go with me. Today I spent 4 hours driving up here. I'll spend another 4 hours drive back, and I'll pay for gas money. To come out here and ask you, please, I'm begging you, get active. I'm asking you, match what I've done half. If you match what I've done half, and you get somebody else to match what you've done half, we'll take back this state, we'll take back our country. You realize, folks, it takes that type of commitment, that type of involvement. You got to get skin in the game, and that's what we need. Now, the first step was coming here today. The second step is get involved. Know what your legislators are doing. How many folks in here know that South Dakota passed tax laws, increased taxes this year? Okay, about half of you. How many folks know that South Dakota increased spending by over $100 million? That's money that you and I will have to pay for. They passed new programs that you just had to have that you didn't know you had to have. And this is under a Republican supermajority. Now, I will beat the party line on that. Republican South Dakota Party platform says that Republicans believe that South Dakotans are taxed enough already, and that Republicans will work in this state to reduce your local, state, and your federal taxes. So if you have politicians saying that they will not take a pledge not to raise your taxes, then how can they be Republicans when Republicans have taken a pledge to be Republicans to lower your taxes? You've also taken a pledge to lower the government impact on you, and that's not happening. So folks, I hate to be the purveyor of gloom and doom. Now, somebody said there's two different types of Marines. You got the ones that are a little bit smaller, they're like the Doberman Pinscher, and you got the ones that are a little bit bigger that look like a Rottweiler. They have short hair, but they're both mean. I'm not so lean anymore, but I'm still mean, and I'm still your guard dog. And this guard dog is barking, telling you that your rights are under attack. Now, as an owner, you got to come out with that shotgun. You got to put them varmints out of our misery that are attacking your rights. Now, hopefully some of you folks got my business card and some pens. Now, when someone asks me, what are my secrets to running for office? In every election I've ran, I provided people refrigerator magnets with my contact information on it. If you've got my business card and you got that pen, it's got my actual home telephone number and my cell phone number on there. Because I can tell the folks, I can't work for you if you don't know how to get in touch with me. If I can be of service to you, please let me know. But I thank you for coming out today, and I thank you for listening to me. Thank you, folks.